because there's nothing wrong with our plumbing. Let me say a couple of things about our thinking on the convention. The earliest that I think it's feasible that we do it would probably be the fall, September. And it'll depend entirely on what the situation in the whole country is. Because a lot of our members and visitors are in the older age group, it's more dangerous. And as you know, our spaces are small. So we have to make absolutely sure that things are under control with COVID before we have a convention.
I can.
Dave, I wonder why your video is locked on. Is there, Dave Sika, do you have any idea why Dave Abramson is on full time?
I am seeing you on full time.
Oh, you are? Okay. I was seeing him on full time.
He just comes on every once in a while.
Yeah, he was on for a long time though, so I was trying to figure out what was going on. Anyway.
No, the signal here is just fine.
Okay.
If you mute yourself, then you won't have that problem. So if you're not speaking, please mute.
Yeah, that goes for everybody. So my guess is that next spring is when we will have the next convention, and it'll be at sort of the regular.
Steve, you're muted yourself, Steve.
Yeah, I may have accidentally pushed the wrong button.
Okay. What was the last thing people heard?
Just a few seconds we lost.
Okay. We haven't obviously made a decision about when we're going to have the convention, but next spring seems most likely. We'll just have to play it by ear, and we will, as our plans develop, we will let everybody know. Because Chuck was unfortunately flooded out, I'm going to make my presentation a little bit longer today. Rather than just, normally I focus on just one aspect of one item at the museum, but this time I'm going to sort of go through a bunch of stuff. I'm going to go through the history of television in Britain and go through some of the sets we have at the museum. Probably all of you know most of this, but so bear with me if I repeat stuff you don't know. The British were really the first to develop a working TV system with the Baird's mechanical system. Some argument that Jenkins in the US may have been at the same time or earlier, but Baird was certainly a pioneer. And by 1930, he was broadcasting in using the BBC radio station transmitter after hours, I think starting at 11 p.m. He was broadcasting television. Hey, Larry, can we switch over to Larry and let Larry zoom in on the Baird televisor?
If Larry speaks, he should pop up now.
Yeah, I saw him in there. He's the Samsung.
Oh, okay. I will put him on.
There we go. This was the set that Baird sold in 1930. Estimates are that about 1,000 of them were made, and it was a 30-line set with a vertical format. And the thinking for that was that most of the stuff that you're going to be able to televise with 30 lines would be vertical. For instance, a person talking, or maybe a dancer at best, and that that was the most practical format to use. In 1933, he started a station at Crystal Palace in London and continued broadcasting, though using his own transmitter. Starting in 1930, he had a regular schedule of programming, a couple of hours a night, and he continued that at Crystal Palace. Well, in 1934, England made the decision that they wanted to move ahead with what they called high definition television, which turned out to be 405 lines. And they held a competition between Baird, who at that time had a 240 line system, mainly mechanical, using the intermediate film process, where he was able to, he actually did the televising on film and developed the film quickly and then scanned the film. And he also used some Farnsworth equipment. On the other side, the other company that was competing against Baird was EMI. And EMI used a camera tube that is amazingly similar to the iconoscope. There is a lot of discussion about to what extent their camera tube came from RCA. It may have been independently developed. It may have been developed in conjunction with RCA. It may have been licensed from RCA. I don't think anybody knows for sure. But anyway, there was a competition that was held, and by 1935, it was obvious that the EMI system was far superior, and that was selected by the BBC for their broadcasting. Larry, why don't you move into the big room and get us the 137T. There we go. In 1936, whoops, you dropped out, Larry. There you're back. Good. In 1936, the BBC started broadcasting from a station they built at Alexandra Palace. And actually, an interesting side note here is that there's an attempt to actually restart 405 line broadcasting from Alexandra Palace, and the group that's doing it is fairly far along in getting the permissions they're needed to do it. This is the earliest 405 line set we have in our collection. It's from 1936, and it's a Kosser 137T. Has a radio built into the bottom. It is a TRF set. There was only one channel, so most of the earliest British sets were TRF rather than super heterodyne, just because the circuitry was simpler and the frequency was low enough. They used a video frequency in the 40 megahertz range that it was simple to implement with 3 or 4 tubes. Now I don't know how much that set cost, but it was an elaborate set. Not many of them were sold. The next set I'm going to talk about is the Kosser 54, which is right here. And this is typical of a low-end set. It doesn't have a radio built in, does have audio, but doesn't have a radio built into it. A radio was a real advantage in a TV set back then because they only broadcast TV for 3 or 4 hours a day, and the rest of the time you could use your TV set for radio. And a lot of these sets had high quality AM radios built into them. Once you pan over to the 2 pi sets, Larry, the one on the left is that's the 815, isn't it, Larry? The one on the left? I can't remember. Anyway, that one is very similar to the Kosser 54, very similar circuits and so forth. The one to the right is probably the most basic set we have. It's got a 5-inch CRT. Still cost a bunch of money. let's move over now, going up in terms of complexity of sets, move over to the HMV 904. Now this is a set, they made this, the 5-inch version, which is the 904, and they made a 7-inch version, which was the 905. And there were actually 2 companies that marketed this set. One was Marconi, and the other was HMV. That's the 5-inch version there. It has a AM shortwave radio built into it. Produced a relatively decent picture. That was sort of a middle of the road price set. Now let's go over to the 901. I should mention that all of these sets, that the 901 is an HMV number. Marconi made an almost identical set with a different number and marketed it separately. This one has a 12-inch CRT and it's a mirror and lid. Most of the sets that use the 12-inch tubes and larger used a mirror and lid design. The tube is almost 3 feet long. It's longer than the 12AP4 that was used in the American pre-war set. This one also has a radio in it, better audio system. Now let's move over to the 902. Yeah, you can see there's the 902 was a really elaborate set. This was the top of the line. It had a phonograph built into the top. It had a AM shortwave radio, and it had a 9-inch tube, but with a magnifier on it, which was an interesting. And it's also a mirror in the lid design. It was the only set of that kind. Again, there was a Marconi version of the same thing. Now let's move over to the Kosser 1210. This set is nicknamed the Century House, as in SENTY, because it looks sort of like what the guards at Buckingham Palace would get inside. Show it from the side, Larry. This is a 15-inch set, not a mirror and lid in lid set, and you can see what a monstrosity it is, how far it sticks out from the wall. The 15-inch tube was the largest set that the British made. Should mention that the records show that about 19,000 sets were made between 1939 and 1936 and 1939. Okay, let's show them one more set. Go into the other room and let's look at the RGD. This is also a very elaborate set, and I think probably my favorite from a design standpoint. It has a 12-inch vertically mounted tube, has a phonograph, has an AM shortwave radio. I don't think very many of those were made. They made that in several different versions, some without the record player. When England declared war on Germany in 1939, they shut down the television broadcasting, supposedly in the middle of a Mickey Mouse cartoon. I think this is probably true. During the war, the engineers repurposed the television transmitter to interfere with the German navigation system. They had a very sophisticated system for their bombers that gave them the ability to pinpoint bomb all over England, but in particular around London. And by repurposing the transmitter, many bombers were diverted to areas where they were harmless. When the war was over, the British restarted broadcasting, and at that time, of course, the country was pretty well devastated. The only sets that survived that were there were pre-war sets. They started manufacturing sets shortly after that, but When they restarted the programming, they restarted it at the exact same point in the Mickey Mouse cartoon that they'd shut it down. And they said, "Pardon the interruption." Typical sort of British dry humor. So anyway, that's a brief overview of the British sets and a little bit about British television history. Anybody have any questions or comments?
Steve, I noticed that you have F connectors coming out of the walls that look like they go to these TV sets. Do you have them working, actually?
Yeah, several of them are working.
Where are you getting the 405 line?
From one of Daryl Hawk's standards converters.
Aha.
We have a distribution system, coax distribution system in that room that's hooked up to a NTSC to 405 line converter, and those sets are run off of that.
Steve?
Yes.
One of the urban legends about the restart of BBC television was that after the Mickey Mouse cartoon concluded, their presenter, as they were called back then, and I think some of the European broadcasters still use them, Jasmine Bly, came on camera in the very same dress that she had worn back in 1939 when they pulled the big switch on the television service.
I'll be darned.
So just a question from Matthew on the more of the technical side. There you're showing early British sets, pre-war sets with up to 15-inch screen sizes. Were those electrostatically or electromagnetically deflected, or how did they pull that off?
No, they were all electromagnetic. They just were more advanced. In fact, when one of the American pre-war sets, one of the GE sets uses a British tube, 12-inch tube that was way shorter than the 12AP4 and way better. So they were just well ahead of us in terms of CRT technology.
And are those tubes Pyrex? I believe.
Yes.
I had heard at one point. Okay, that's true.
Yes. I don't know if they're technically Pyrex, but they're high temperature glass.
They're not soda lime glass. They're borosilicate or whatever the right term is. Okay. And out of curiosity, the ones you have working in the museum, where did you manage to get CRTs for them?
We were lucky. A number of our sets had good CRTs in them, including that 15-inch monster. It works. We were able to we bought a tube for the 5-inch set on eBay years ago. We have a bunch of the 12-inch mirror and lid sets, and probably only about a third of those tubes are good. So we just cherry picked to find tubes that worked.
So were the 12-inch mirror and lid sets the 12 LP4s or equivalent both on both sides of the Atlantic, or the British have a different 12-inch tube?
The British had a different 12-inch tube. It was substantially longer. I think not as bright just from my experience as the 12AP4.
Yeah. Thank you.
Also worth noting is if you look at the Kosser sets and the early Dumont sets, the early Dumonts were basically knockoffs, if not total ripoffs, of the Kossers, weren't they?
Yes, that's true. And nobody knows what the deal was. Originally, we have sales literature of the very earliest Dumont sets for sale were actually Kossers. And then when Dumont made their own line shortly after that, they are very similar. They use American tubes, and they use electrostatic deflection rather than magnetic deflection. But they were very, very similar.
So I read at one point, though the source was not 100% trustworthy, shall we say, someone's internet page, that some of the RCA experiments in the US in 36 were using British equipment, so intended for 405 line, but we're operating it at 343 to get the same horizontal frequency on a 60 hertz as opposed to a 50 hertz system. Do you know anything about this history?
I haven't heard that.
Okay.
As far as I know, RCA developed their own line from the beginning, from their earliest 120 line,
All the way up.
set all the way up. Yeah.
Okay, so the fact then that the 343 is what you get if you run 405 at 60 hertz is a coincidence?
I think so. Now there is an interesting, the RCA put up a receiving big antenna on Long Island in an attempt to pick up the British transmission. And now I'm not sure if what they used for a receiver, they were successful. There are pictures of that transatlantic transmission. And I don't know if they used, I don't remember. I think in the articles about it, it talks about it, but I don't know if they used a British set for that or what.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Okay.
I'd like to just point in one of the things that I heard about as a Brit was that one of the reasons for the government going ahead with a television service early on was because they knew a war was coming, and they were also working on radar, and they used the television service as a way to ramp up volume production for CRTs and other RF circuitry that would be useful for radar. And a lot of the engineers who were involved with TV when the war broke out, they were immediately told to go and work on defense projects.
That makes sense. I had not heard that, but that makes sense.
Another thing that you mentioned the 240 line system, and I understand what happened with that was that Baird didn't immediately back off, but he continued to campaign. So when they opened the service initially, which was in November of 1936, they had actually equipped 2 studios at Alexandra Palace, one for each system. And they did a week of one and a week of the other. So some of your sets may even have a system switch that's marked 240 and 405. But apparently a lot of the performers complained that the Baird system was so horrible to work with. I think they had a flying spot scanner for announcements, and they used that, as you said, that intermediate film system, which led to some horrible timing issues in terms of studio production. So it only lasted until about February of 1937, and then they dropped the Baird one completely and just went over to 405.
Yes, that's true. And none of our sets have the 240, 405 switch. There is a place on the escutcheon that for those switches. There are a few surviving sets with the switch, but none of ours have it. If
you poke the little dome out, you'll see that underneath it says 240 and 405.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And I can vouch
Steve,
for.
Could I back?
Yeah, I can vouch for the British industry taking people straight into the RAF, because a late friend of mine, John Street, KA4MFF, who emigrated here after the war, told me about experiment. He first was exposed to television at the Radio Olympia exhibition, and he went on to, by the end of the war, experimenting with radar up at 216 megahertz by that time. And they thought it was curious that they were able to keep their tea warm and heat up their lunches near the RF circuits. And of course, years later, he was found to have lymph cancer. And he succumbed about, I guess around 20 years ago to prostate cancer. So, yeah, there was a lot of experimentation going on that people didn't realize that what the circuits were capable of doing, that what they thought was a curious convenience really was also quite deadly.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had to learn that.
Steve, if I could back up to the, am I still muted? Steve, James here.
Yes.
Yeah, if I could back up to the RCA reception of BBC signals in the 30s at Riverhead, Long Island.
Right.
At their lab there, they were looking at spectrum, VHF, low VHF, and one day they saw something that was very decidedly television. They heard the buzz, the vertical sync, and realized these were television signals they were receiving, and tried to cobble up something with existing television circuitry so they could make pictures. I think they did very crudely. They were so excited, they ordered some sets from the UK, and but the time the sets were shipped over, of course, on a boat, this little rare bit of skip had disappeared, never to reappear again. So that's one of the accounts I read about this.
Huh. That's interesting.
I think I've seen a picture. One of the articles I read about this, they're actually unloading some of these sets they bought. I don't know whether they were Marconi's or what, but they were bringing them off the boat, getting them to Riverhead as quickly as possible so they could try to receive or see the BBC signals on an honest to God British set. But the sets just did not get there in time. The skip was gone.
Huh. Interesting.
Hey, Steve, I have to tell you that for a last-minute program substitution, this worked out pretty well. I'm just sitting here thinking, as many times as I've been to the museum, I don't think I've ever taken a close look at the British sets like that. So this is great.
Yeah, they sort of get skipped over.
Yeah, I would make the same comment.
It's fascinating, actually. I'm kind of glad you did all this.
Great.
It's really interesting.
Well, it really is nice, because this is what we like to do at a conference, is to get together with a few group of people and talk about stuff. And we can do this now here with a whole bunch of people. It's a good way to have at least a portion of this in any meeting that we do in the future.
Okay, well, let's plan on doing that. Okay, any other questions or comments?
I think I'd like to give one answer to Matt on the scanning frequencies of 343 and other line numbers. There's only certain low order dividers that are practical with vacuum tubes. And so all of the scan line counts are constructed by very simple dividers. I think 525 is some 5s and some 7s to make the dividers to get down to 60. And that's why you'll see similarity in various counts of lines.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah.
It's very convenient for those of us who have collections of British sets in the US, that you can take one of Daryl's amazing converters and set it up for the old RCA 343 standard, and then the horizontal frequencies right, so you can use it on an old we could run an old British 405 line set on that, but with 60 frames per second. But and I had assumed that this was intentional because the British were so far ahead. I had read that at one point, but I like your explanation better, David, that it's actually a fluke of the circuitry.
Right.
Steve, this is a quick question. How did you get so many British sets at the museum? Was this just a personal interest of yours?
When I first started the museum, a lot of those sets were on the market at reasonable prices. They were cheaper than American sets, and so I bought all of them. Came from the UK. One actually came from Italy. Was apparently in use in Rome because they had a similar frequency for their television tests. But I bought them all, and they were shipped over.
Wonderful.
Early days.
Could I chime in? Could I chime in again?
Sure.
James, could I chime in again about the receiving BBC signals over here? Apparently, there was some more skip in the late 50s, 58, 59. I don't remember the exact year, but there's a Radio Electronics magazine article. It's slugged looking in on London. And there was somebody in the Detroit area who was receiving Skip from the BBC. He had several screenshots published with the article. He talked about modifying an American set to work at 405.50 and also changing the polarity, since the British were transmitted with a positive modulation, where we transmitted analog TV in a negative sense of modulation, and also recovering the AM sound. And he said he was receiving these signals with nothing more than some wire antennas in his attic there in the Metro Detroit area. So that magazine article might be of interest to somebody who wanted to pursue this further.
Yeah, I'll look it up.
Do you remember what month that article
Looking
appeared?
in on London. It was
Is
in
that-
Radio Electronics at 5859. It's called Looking In on London.
That's probably available
And there's several
on
screenshots.
it's probably available on worldradiohistory.com's
Yeah.
archives.
Right.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is.
We have a question from Ed Williams that was texted in. And the question is, any other European countries doing TV in the late 30s? All kinds of countries. I mentioned Italy. They had TV transmitters in Milan and in Rome. They made prototype TV sets. The Germans were very active with TV before the war. In fact, the 36 Olympics in Berlin were televised. It was mostly closed circuit. They used coaxial cable to deliver the video to viewing rooms. And actually, they made some very interesting sets, including the E1, which was a very inexpensive set. It had all kinds of advances, including flyback and high voltage drive from the flyback, a rectangular CRT. And it was inexpensive to make, and their plan was it was going to be the people's television, similar to the people's radio that the Germans sold, and it was going to be part of their propaganda machine. Of course, it came out too late to be of much help to them, but there are several of those sets that survive. Russia is another interesting country.
Can I chime in one more?
Yes.
Yeah, James here again. I was going to chime in one more time. I spent a fair amount of time in Moscow back in the 90s, early 90s. And one of the things I discovered on one of my weekends off at the Polytechnic Museum in downtown Moscow was a mirror lid set, which was labeled in Cyrillic, but it bore the unmistakable RCA meatball logo. And I did a good bit of research on that set. I found out how it got there in the mid-1930s. RCA sold the Russians their first electronic television system, and this was one of the RCA field test sets, which had been taken to Russia. It was operating, I believe, at 343 lines. And they did start television broadcasting before the war there in Moscow, in Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg, and one other city. And I did do an article on this. It was published in Antique Radio Classified, and I believe you picked it up, and it's posted on the ETF website if somebody wants to take a look at it.
Thank you for covering that for me. And one of those, just a side comment, one of those Russian sets still exists. At least one, other than the one you saw. There's one, a collector in the US has one of them.
And
yeah, I think that one came out of East Germany when the wall came down. Somebody had presence of mind enough to take it out, slip some dollars or Deutschmarks or whatever it was to somebody in a museum in East Berlin and liberate the set and bring it back.
Huh. Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
I just posted in the chat a link to a web page on the E1 if you're interested in seeing more details on that.
Great. Any other questions, comments?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm diverting a little bit from tonight's discussion. Is that okay? I have a question about a Dumont. Okay. My name is Abe Klug. I'm from Central New Jersey, which is Dumont land. And looking at an old picture, I'm trying to find a Revere RA-113. And as a young child, when the repairman came in, I thought he was a rocket scientist, and all he was doing was testing tubes. So the question I have about that, A, where can I locate that if possible? And did the RA-113 have only a vertical chassis, or did it also have a horizontal? Anybody know that?
Well, as far as I know, the 113 was a vertical chassis.
It was a vertical.
As far as I know, yeah.
Was there a similar model that had a horizontal?
Well, Dumont used both. I think I responded to your email with some detail.
I didn't get it.
Okay, well, I'll send it again.
Thank you.
But Dumont made sets with both vertical and horizontal chassis.
Okay. Where can I hunt? It's a challenge, this RA-113. Doesn't have to be refurbished. It could be cobwebs and dust, and I'll clean it. Doesn't have to work. Any ideas?
I'll tell you, a really, really, really avid Dumont collector in Iowa.
Okay.
Is a name of Andrew Palmer. He's younger. He operates under his mother's Facebook. He might be someone to be looking into. Jane Callahan Palmer is her name on Facebook. He's a
okay. I'm not on Facebook. Is there another way to contact them?
I can give you my email. I'll direct message it to you. You can email me and I can give you his phone number.
That would be great. Okay.
I can't promise anything, but he's the craziest young kid I know about Dumont. He knows a ton about him, so he'd be the guy to know.
That would be great. Sure.
We may have one at the museum that usually we have an auction every year, and we get a bunch of stuff donated.
Okay.
And the 113 is a little too new for us, for our collection. So if we have one, whenever we get it, I'll check. I'll have Larry check and see if we've got one there, and if so, we'll get in touch with you.
Oh,
I'm pretty sure. I'm sorry. I was going to say I'm pretty sure a 113 sold in our last auction out there for $1.
Right.
I'll take it.
If it's sold for $1, that means that Andrew bought it.
I'll give $1.50. How's that?
They show up.
That would be great. What year was that produced? About 1953? Anybody know?
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at it. Yeah.
I'm getting, with a quick Google search, I'm getting a 1950 model year for the RA-113.
Oh, really? Okay.
Were there variations on a 113? Like there's a B3 or an A?
I'm seeing B3 here. I'm not a huge Dumont collector myself. I don't have personal knowledge. This is just real-time internet searching. But the one that comes up here is the RA-113-B3, and I don't know if there was a different one as well.
I coincidentally, just going through the net, got one of those big books, 1953 schematic, all the RAs. So it's very interesting. So I was able to secure that, just to let you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments, or should we move on to Blake's question that he posed, which is, well, I'll let you do it, Blake, once you ask the question.
All right, guys. So I've been kind of curious. I've been trying to, as I've kind of expanded my territory in from Predictas into early roundies that were sold around the same time as Predicta. I've been curious to see who in the Midwest region specifically who actively tackles roundy color restoration. And I know many of us on here that are in the Midwest say, oh, I'll do it. But I mean, like more so like, a turnaround time of less than 5 months. So if that's unrealistic, if there's no one on here, if no one has any good leads, that's fair. But I've been pretty lucky to find Predicta technicians that can do that type of stuff. And I do have a roundy, a CTC9 behind me that I got restored from a gentleman in San Jose, California. The transportation costs for doing that stuff, though, long-term for several sets is just insanely untenable. So that's why I'm hoping that I can find someone maybe within 500 miles. So I don't know if anybody has any leads or anything.
Maybe a challenge in general. Finding people, as you know, finding people to work on old sets is hard. I can do it. The problem is I've done it in the past for people. The problem is I find it uneconomical because of the countless hours it takes to do it. And I think that a lot of other people have kind of come to the same conclusion. It's also very hard to offer turnaround times and guarantees depending on how many tough dogs you find and what parts you end up having to fabricate or try to locate. Those sets are notoriously complicated. So
a year is a standard turnaround time.
That's fair. I mean, and listen, I've also, since I've posed this question, I have found some luck. I do have a gentleman that's local to me that I don't know if he's necessarily taking on clients, but he took on this restoration. I have a CTC7. I can't think of the name of it right now because I've got too many damn TVs, but it's a CTC7, and he's got it basically tied up for me. He did a bang up job. So fortunately, I guess it also depends. Like to your point, Matthew, that if you get lucky and you buy a set that doesn't have anything that needs crazy fabrication, I've noticed that half these color sets, even like something in the yoke, like the yoke covers, they usually look like they're like pretty trashed. That looks to be standard wear. Sometimes you get lucky and that's not the case. But I mean, I did fortunately find someone that could help me. And he did do a really good job on the CTC7 that I have and did a relatively quick turnaround time compared to what it could have took him. It took him like less than 2 months, which is good. But I'll tell you guys, the gentleman that does my technical work in San Jose, his turnaround time is less than 2 weeks. But he also, I think that he might be a different breed.
Well, Blake, what part of it is if somebody who's doing it as for a living is probably maybe one of the last. There's a guy here in New Jersey. He's an old retired television repairman, and he's continued doing his television and radio repair work in the basement of his home now. But you don't really want to have your set repaired by him because he's very fast and he's very inexpensive, but he fixes the set just like he would have fixed it back in the 60s. He'll change out the 2 or 3 capacitors in the tube to get it working, and then you get your set back. And that's not, that's certainly not what most of us are looking for.
The other thing to keep in mind is, and again, I'm thinking somewhat from my own experience, I'm quite sure that if I was doing this hobby full time, as my full-time job, I could offer much quicker turnaround. But I'm, trying to. Previously, I was attending, graduate school, and now I'm working full time. So I don't, it's not like you can really devote 8 hours, a day to working on this stuff. And I think a lot of other people, there is quite a big enough market to support people for the most part full time or end up in the same boat.
There is a guy who I've heard mentioned several times now, a fellow who runs a TV repair shop in Florida, and several people on Facebook have said that they've had some sets done by him, and not modern sets, Predictas and things like that. And he does TV repair, but he does the old sets, and supposedly people are happy with him. That would make him somewhat unique as far as I know.
Yeah, no, definitely. The gentleman in San Jose, I think that I think he might have other work that keeps him heavily active in like still tube-based electronics. I don't know. I don't think his primary vocation's that, but he does. He does give actually a fairly aggressive price. But at any rate, I do agree with you though that I don't think he doesn't actually do the CTC9 that he did for me. He did like all the deflection circuits and stuff, but he didn't go through and actually like do everything like all the way through soup to nuts, quite like what you would have, like what some of my Predictas I've had done. Dan Jones on some of my Predictas will go through and change every single part on them. And that's good. You know what I mean? You almost want that when you spend that kind of money. I mean, and I know some of us may do it and then we may go through and not quite do it that way and they still work just fine. And that's totally fine. But I'm just speaking to the fact that to your point, Dave, it is, I think, a dying art.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, the funny thing is that people ask me, so the new stuff's so hard to work on. Why is it that you were able to fix my, flat screen in a half an hour, and you won't even give me a quote on a vintage thing with vacuum tubes? I'm like, well, if the flat screen's bad, it's a couple capacitors or a power converter chip, and you got to know what you're doing to find it.
Right.
But once you know how to do it, it's, the hot air gun and, 5 minutes to change the part and you're done. It's out the door again, and that's not the case with these vintage stuff. As you said, to do it right, I'm going through there and I'm checking every single resistor, and I'm, replacing, at least half the components in total. And, it's tens of hours or more, for one job.
And then you can run into things like if they have an early circuit board, that brown material,
Yep.
it's actually carbonized around all of the high voltage, so that you measure between all the pins of the horizontal output tube, and it's all like a few hundred K between every pin. So it's you can end up with some of the plastic parts completely turned into crumbly stuff or gooey stuff. So it's a lot of work, and you can have a set that's being kept in a nice indoor, warm place, not got damp, and you can be lucky, or you can have one that somebody's left outside in a shed, and you end up having so much work it's not worth it.
Yeah, and I've kind of noticed too that, honestly, I think a lot of the techs that do this, honestly, all the techs that do this stuff, in my opinion, do it because they love it. Even the gentleman that does my stuff out in San Jose, the gentleman that did doing my stuff in Cleveland now, you have to love it to do it, because you put countless hours. The CTC7 that I'm about to get done now, the gentleman probably has realistically 45 hours of his weekend time in it, troubleshooting it, recapping it, going through it. And you can't, for him to realistically value his time and charge me, that's a lot of money. You know what I mean? Like and so to go and get it and say a flat rate of $300 or $400 or $500, that's almost priceless. So I do recognize that too. But the purpose of the conversation too is just to see if anybody had any aces in the hole, or if anyone in the conversation was potentially taking on work but not really talking about it, and they wanted to talk about it. I know that it's very intricate work, and I'm very appreciative of the gentleman that still take an interest to make it a priority, because it's above me, and I just appreciate it, and I will pay for it gladly.
I'd like to try to find. Oh,
I was just going to say, people ask me all the time, how much does it cost to restore an old radio? And I say, I can tell you exactly how much it would cost. I said, I will charge you $1 an hour, and it's going to cost you $1 million.
Yeah, I worked it out once for me. I said, okay, if I'm really paying myself what I would charge a consulting client, because I'm an electrical engineer by trade. I do take on some professional consulting work. I usually charge, $50 an hour, pretty typical for, that type of work. I'm like, okay, if you really want to know what it's going to cost, that's $5,000 right away, at least in my time, to take this on. It may be more, and then people usually go, oh, that, if I was really, as you said, if I was really going to charge what, I would charge for my time for other work, that's what it works out to be.
Don't sell yourself short though, Matt, because again, I get a lot of inquiries coming in through the club here. And there are, if somebody's got a set that's important to them, typically it was their dad's, or it's a family heirloom or whatever, a TV or even a radio, $200, $300, $400, $500, $600, $700, $800 repairs are not,
really?
You think they're not going to do it. And then they say, yep, sure, let's do it.
Dave, I've seen many examples of that at the shop I help out at, where people have brought in, it's an old family heirloom, their grandparents or their great grandparents had it, and they've spent insane money to revive something that, if you or I saw it at a swap meet, we wouldn't look at it twice, just because to us it looks like a hunk of junk. But we've made some quite miraculous restorations, and fortunately made a lot of people happy.
We do free repairs sometimes at the New Jersey Antique Radio Club, or we used to, back when we used to get together and do things. And I remember one time a woman came in, she brought in a little plastic, AA5 clock radio. It was a garish, awful, orange colored, rotten looking thing. And it was completely smashed. And there was a big chunk out of the side of it. And I'm looking at her and I said, you can we can find you another one of these. You can find the same model radio somewhere else. And this is where I learned. She looked at me and she said, "This was my dad's radio and I want it fixed." and I fixed it for her, and she was the happiest person on earth that day.
And I agree with that.
Blake, getting back to your original thing though, I too would love to find someone around the Detroit area near me that could possibly. I've got a CTC5, and granted, I haven't worked on it in probably over a year, but I got it 95% of the way there. But the last 5% is just kicking my butt, and it's the only color TV I've ever tried working on, and at the rate it's going, it'll be the last one I ever try to work on. So.
That's the problem. It is not just old TVs. I so many engineering projects at work where getting that last 5% of the functionality is 90% of the work. So first off, don't blame yourself. That's par for the course. But yeah, having someone else to give you a hand in that case could be a godsend.
Well, and I'm relentless on trying to get stuff working. I mean, I'm one of those sickos that loves working on predictors, and there's been ones where I'll work on them and then I just get fed up with it. I put it on the shelf for a month or two, and finally, when I feel like fighting with it again, I get it out and keep plugging it.
My last 3 TVs.
Hey, Dave.
Hello?
Can you hear me? Dave, it's Mike. Can you hear me?
We hear you.
I just want to relate a couple of things that weren't mentioned in this. You may remember that I did actually donated the TV to the Info Age, the New Jersey Clubs Museum, that I was something around a RCA right after the 637, I guess.
721.
Okay, and I went through everything on it. I mean, I kept it here for months, and to my knowledge, there was no capacitor that wasn't replaced. It had hours and hours on it. They took it down there. Things
you went through almost everything.
So something must have been hiding under something else, and I got called after the fire, and using the fire extinguisher on it. And I said, "Yeah, I want it back at least for the knobs," and that was about all it was that was still usable on it. But again, with the thing, I have a lot of people through the collection here and things I've had at the museum, and there's always someone in the crowd that has a grandfather's radio that they wanted fixed, and how much it would mean to them. And one of the last ones, no matter how much I ducked this guy, he found me. And it was a Grundig or Blaupunkt, one of those European sets with the switches in front. And it ended up being 200 some odd bucks, because I bought a junker for parts and eventually got it going for him. And we actually did the math. If I had charged him that I do in my normal business, nuclear medicine stuff, it would have been about $8,000. And maybe he still would have gone for it, like you said, and I missed my chance. But
yeah, I mean, that's exactly the sort of numbers I would come up with when I was trying to see whether I could do this professionally. And I mean, if you find people who will pay that, great. It'd be an awesome career. But I just somehow doubt that there's really that many.
Yeah, you get 1 or 2 a year.
Yeah.
That gentleman looking for that Dumont, Andrew Palmer, I sent you his phone number. He has that with the parts chassis. He'll sell you. So just so you know.
Oh, and I happen to look. I'm looking at the Sam's Index here. There were 8 different RA113s in the series, 1 through 8.
Cool.
May I ask? May I actually ask another question? This might be another question for a future meeting, but I think it would be of interest to the group. Are we sort of done with that conversation, or?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw out. I remembered my CTC7 was a Sanford. That's the one he's working on for me, just so I had it for the record. But yeah, that's fine.
Just want to. My name is Reed Victorson. I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota. I just got a CRT from you guys for a Dumont RA305 from Minnesota. I bought the set and couldn't find anyone personally locally, except there's a small town on the border of Minnesota and Wisconsin called Stillwater, and it's a company named Johnny's TV, and they've been in business since 1948. Call and they said, sure, bring it in. And they looked it over and they said the picture tube that was in there, the CRT, was weak, which is why I then looked on your website and things and found the CRT through the museum. And then you got, excuse me, you guys sent it out and they got it running. It's fine. He's a little, it's not as sharp as he wanted as far as a CRT, but it's perfectly functional and perfectly viewable. But yeah, the name of the store, it's his name is Tom Severson, and it's called well, the website is johnstvmn.com. And you know, he's perfectly willing to look at it and see. I don't know if he does old color TVs, but you know, I had gotten this Dumont, and he was like, yeah, I've been in business since 1948. So anyway, Johnny's TV in Stillwater, Minnesota. So yeah, it's 20 miles from St. Paul, Minnesota.
Great. We may have people driving from halfway across the country to go see him.
Well, give him a call. There, the owner is Tom, and then the other partner is named Mike. But you know, give them a call and see what they say. If you want the number, it's 651-439-5965. Again, it's 651-439-5965.
Thank you.
Yeah. Why don't we, Mike Molnar had wanted to bring us up to date on the color set he's working on. So, Mike, you want to say a few words?
Yeah, let me see if I can get the screen in here. Oops. Do you, Dave, do you have to turn my screen on? Oops. Hey, there we are. Let me see if I can switch it around. You got me there? Yep. A lot's been done. I do have color now. I do have issues where, as time goes on.
Mike, excuse me, you want to back up and tell people what we're looking at and what the problems were before?
Yeah. So yeah, if you hadn't seen the other meetings, it's a 15-inch Zenith color set. It had lost color sync. It had been one that I usually turn on when there's visitors over, and it ran me through a lot of hoops. So finally, I had to do a lot of capacitor replacement in the chassis here. And the neat thing about this set is the way it's constructed. That with a lot of the signal work on a vertical chassis and the power supplies and horizontal, well down on a horizontal chassis on the bottom, it's pretty easy to set up some test equipment and then get your scope and have at it. The color is actually looks better on the phone than it does in person, but the you know, it was just a matter of replacing a lot of capacitors, and then I actually started looking around at the when it was kind of intermittent. I was worried about the crystal, and in looking at since I didn't have a whole drawer full of them, I was looking on the internet, and I found out that they make these things I have here on the tabletop next to this crystal is ceramic resonators, and they're cheap. I don't have one in there working now, but they do work, and you can someone in China will be happy to send you a bag of enough for every old color television in the world. And I don't know what they use that many in right now, but the last problem I had with it though ended up being a real troubleshooting experience, because once I had color coming back on, I wasn't happy with the color that I was getting. So I was trying to make adjustments once I had color synced in to go to the color output stages. And the color outputs are these 12 BY7, they're pentodes. And in the diagram, I hope I'm not jumping around too much for everybody, but they're a simple amplifier. And what I was finding on going between the different colors is that I was getting the screen grid voltage 120 or so on each one. One of them had 145 volts at the beginning. And then I went back later and was looking at it. It was down to 56 volts. I went to another one. It was at 90 volts. So the plates were lower than the screen. And one of them, the plate was 170, higher than the others. So I started looking into coupling capacitors and resistors to see if any had changed value. They have, to get the current through, they have 2 watt resistors in parallel. And when I went to the one that had the 170 volt plate voltage, the resistors were cool. The other one, it was getting warmer. And the one with the 56 volts on a plate was burning hot, even though it wasn't discoloring. So I had tried about everything. It goes right into a DC restorer stage. That seemed fine. Replaced a couple other capacitors, no change. And then all the tubes have been tested on the Hickok here. And finally, out of desperation, I just flipped the locations of the tubes. And sure enough, the problems followed the tubes. So I had some kind of, as the longer the set would be on, the lower the voltages were going on these. And finally dug around in a few boxes and was able to replace some tubes. So you can see now I'm getting a little bit of blooming as the set's been on for a while. So I'm still going through some power supply issues for that. If I turn the brightness down, it'll get better. And then the color tint, I'll step back for a second. I had no real method of calibrating it. There was no documentation, so I was just kind of eyeballing it. And I thought I had things pretty good until I got to the part where I thought the lyrics said, follow the slightly green tinted road, follow the slightly green tinted road. And when I actually watched, it's supposed to be a yellow brick road, and I haven't been able to achieve yellow yet. But it's getting there. Just in the last hour or so that it's been on, I found I've got a kind of weak connection at the blue tube socket. So if I jiggle that around, I get some flickering on the screen. So I got to go back and look at that some more. But this is part of that whole thing about restoring sets. Is this has been like a 2-month project so far. Fortunately, I've not having a lot of people over with the virus, so I can pull this out, take up the room, set up camp around it, and then wait till the next day to find out the next problem that's developed. I've spoken to John Folsom, who has one of these, and one of his bits of advice was to lower my expectations. So we'll have to see if I can get a little better than John's telling me. But
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Yeah, how's the grayscale on this when you turn down the color?
I've had it. Right. If I did it right now, I can't get it great. It's it'll always have a little bit of a tint to it, one color or another. So I don't know if there's a way to set the screens and then go back to everything else and bring it in. They have a number of controls for blue, green, and then there's no control for red. You have to. This is in the color output, not the screen controls. You have you get red like as the standard, and then there's one to balance the blue and green out. I haven't figured out the best way to set that up yet.
Yeah, I was just thinking that if your yellow is really missing, that could be a B minus Y DMOD failure.
Okay. Well, it's not that it's missing. It's just that I can't, I can get it if I really play around to get it close, but there's still a little green tint to it that I haven't been able to get rid of.
You've got a bar generator up there. Have you tried it?
Oh yeah, and that's not quite right. Equal to the to what I'm seeing on the screen on the programming. Yeah, I was pretty lucky that in flea markets I've been able to pick up some pretty neat old test equipment. This color generator is a beauty. I can give a hint for getting good test equipment. If you want TV test equipment, go to a radio flea market because nobody there wants that stuff. If you want radio stuff, go to a TV flea market and you'll do pretty good on pricing there.
So
but I mean, it's been a project and it has some more time to go.
So I just wanted to comment. First off, congrats on having a good 15G. You're ahead of the game right away there. That's very cool. Also, it was typical because of the 15-inch tubes did not use the modern rare earth phosphors. The red was always the weakest. So typically red would be run at full brightness, whatever that was, and then that's why you'd adjust the other two to match. And it was because of the lower efficiency of the red phosphor that they had at that time.
Yeah, and so I don't have any procedure. That would have been nice to say, okay, when you go to the output of the 12BY7, you want the red to be at this level. Green should be at this level. So I'm just kind of winging it over there, which takes me back to very many years ago, fixing TVs in people's homes when the one color TV in the middle of the living room in a big console was the only thing the family had. And I'd be setting up with my tube caddy and all this stuff, and the housewife would set 3 kids on the couch and say, "Watch him till he's done." then the entertainment could be the TV. So you learn how to wing it and get some things suitable without going through the procedures. But this one's going to be a little tougher.
Did you have to replace the tube, or was it good when you got the set?
The CRT is original.
Wow.
But the 12BY7s, that really had me stumped for a while. What kind of internal short is developing on those that if you first turn the set on, they were all right about what was penciled in the diagram, and you'd go back in about 20 minutes and they were all over the place.
It's probably grid emission. I believe the 539C, which is the Hickok, it looks like you have, there's a special test feature for that. You might try that and see if that will identify it for you.
Yeah.
Other thing too, how long did you leave them in the tester for? Did you leave them on for a while to get them good and hot?
No, probably not, because it was being done in a bunch.
Little trick I learned was, like, if you have a little tomato paste can, put that over top of the tube while it's on the tester, and that'll help it heat up.
Okay.
Maybe gas.
Yeah.
I don't remember the last time I've used a tube tester. My way of dealing with it is I just pop a new tube in. Virtually, if I'm restoring a set like that, I would replace all the tubes with new ones. Now maybe I'll get a bad new one, but I've just never had much good luck with tube testers.
No, I've not used.
Not using a Raytheon.
But there are so many of them to do at one time that, and the barn that I have some tubes stored in was under snow, so it was easier to dig out some tubes. But
Take my recommendations for tube testers with a grain of salt. That's one of the other things I collect. I have almost every Hickok model post-war, so each their own.
When I was a kid, I bought a tube tester. It was a nice Hickok made with a Philco label, but the TV repairman owner of the shop said the reason he was selling it is because his TV repair outside guy wouldn't use it. He would just swap a tube and see if that fixed it, and that's really often the fastest way. When I did that videotape machine, I didn't test any of the tubes in it. I think my associate Jay tested some 6550s in there, and they would show okay, but you'd put them under load and run them for a while, and they'd start turning red hot, do bad things. Probably a little gas in them.
Yeah, you can see how many tubes for a TV. This looks like a little city in here that you're looking at from some hilltop someplace. But yeah, and those three 12BY7s, I don't know if I said that before, they're original Zeniths from when the thing was built. So I guess the warranty's certainly on those. But anyway, that's my report for this month on it, and hopefully the yellow brick road will get yellow somewhere in the near future, or yellower anyway.
Thank you.
So
There's a book.
Thanks, Mike.
Sorry. I was going to mention real quickly on world radio history, there's a book on there. If you look for it, it's called Getting the Most Out of Vacuum Tubes. And it's a book from the late 50s written by an engineer at CBS Hytron. And boy, is it good on explaining all these oddball problems that you run into tubes that they didn't tell you about. And also all the idiosyncrasies of tube testers and why they test good, they'll test better or worse than they should be because of the idiosyncrasies in the tube testers. It's a great book, and it's a quick read.
There's a PDF version of it too that I've got. So, but
world radio history, yeah.
Matthew, I wanted to ask you quickly, just not to digress, but you said you've got a bunch of the different Hickoks. Which one's your favorite?
It's funny you ask. I have quite a collection of them, and I've actually created the right equipment to do calibrations and have gone through what surviving Hickok documentation there is and created my own calibration procedures where it's missing and put a lot of work into that. But after all that, my favorite model is not one of the super fancy ones that everyone covets. It's the Hickok 752A. And the reason I like the 752A is that it has the most sockets on the panel. I like to work on weird stuff, so I'm always trying to test oddball tubes. And it's new enough in the lineup of Hickocks that it doesn't have as many problems as the older ones, especially the older 539s, like the 539A has. It only has 1 meter, which means you have you have a third the probability of having a meter failure. And it has a dual triode test, which is extremely convenient if you go through a lot of tubes with dual triodes. Plus, it is a, quote, laboratory grade tester, unquote. And so it has the direct readout in micromos, old units, and the different ranges. So, unlike, say, something like a 6000 or 6000A, or even a worse, like a original 600, where you've got one fixed grid signal voltage that isn't going to do a very good test on a small signal tube. They're the nice thing about the 539s is you've got the separate line voltage meter. The ultimate, if you want to go there, would be the 580A. I have one of those. They seem to have transformer trouble and are very hard to get going again. So does that more or less answer it?
Yeah, no, thanks. I've got a 6000A myself that luckily I got for free. In college, we have a bunch of students helping take stuff out of the chemistry building because they were going to redo it. And there's this pile of junk out by the dumpster, and I see this red suitcase with an electrical tag on it. I thought, I asked, what's this? I said, oh, it's out by the dumpster. You can have it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's a nice tester. The problem with the 6000A is it doesn't test the old 4 and 5 pin 30s tubes. If you're into that,
There's a different socket cartridge for it. Yeah.
I searched for, I kid you not, I'm not exaggerating, 21 years to find one of those socket cartridges.
You and me both.
Maybe I outbid you on eBay. Anyway, last year I finally found one. But yeah, if you want a tube tester that can do both Compactrons, Nuvistors, and 4 and 5 pins, you're much better off getting a CA4 or a CA5 adapter and using that on an old model like a 6000 than trying to take a new model like a 6000A or a 6000B and get the right adapter to go backwards.
Well, congratulations on finding one.
Thank you.
That's a unicorn for sure.
The one I've never found, and I've been searching for, I guess, 22 years now for one of these, is a rim lock adapter, a genuine Hickok rim lock adapter. I have never found one. They were sold. They're in all the catalogs, but I have just about every other adapter socket, but not that one.
Must not have sold too many of them.
Yeah, it's for European radios in the U.S., so I don't think there were too many.
Well, Matt, if you or anyone else happens to have one, I have a TV7 here, the rare caseless model. I'm looking for a case for it, and I've been looking for about 2 years, and they don't seem to show up. So just putting that out there.
All right, the rare caseless model. I talked a friend into buying a caseless TV7 because it was being sold cheap. Because it didn't have the case. And then, of course, he just said he just wanted a tube tester to test tubes with, which, of course, it'll do just fine. Those things are really reliable. But now, of course, he wanted the case. So, you know, it seems like it will go around another generation of being passed through.
Well, anybody else have any comments? Anything else?
Question.
Yeah,
Someone
Steve.
mentioned, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Someone mentioned getting the most out of vacuum tubes. The book, is that the one by Robert Tomer?
I'm not.
In the chat.
It may be.
Yeah, that's the guy.
Tomer.
That's the guy.
This is a reprint. They're still available, and you could also download them for free off the web at different places. But anyway, I just want to mention that it is a very good book, by the way. I said this is a reprint I have, but anyway, that's all I want to say.
I put the link in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Steve,
James here.
Yeah.
Which one?
Either
James,
one.
Okay, I'll go quickly. Show and tell. Go down to the library and pull the article. It's on page 62 of the September 1958 Radio Electronics, Looking In on London by Hartland Smith, if anybody wants to pursue it. So September 1958.
Perfect.
Yeah, I've got a question for the group with regards to shopping overseas for electronics on eBay. This applies to more than just a little bit regarding televisions. I recently saw on eBay a radio that I wanted, and 2 days after I won the bid, the seller emails me directly. It says that the shipping company has informed them that the shipment has been lost, and they are offering me a substitute item of their choice or a refund. Well, needless to say, I picked the refund. Hold on. It gets better, Matt. Now, the item I was bidding on was for one of the best clones of a really good AM/FM shortwave portable radio, a Uniden CR 2021 which is a knockoff of and a very good one at that, of the Sony 2001. So I told the seller I want the refund. Sure enough. Oh, yes. The other thing was I insisted on all communications being through eBay and not direct email. And when I said that I wanted just the refund, I didn't want any substitute items, they agreed. Sure enough, the refund appears in my PayPal account. However, now this is where it gets crazy. About 3 weeks later, I find a big box on my front porch. This is from a eBay seller, vendor, I should say. He's actually a quote-unquote dealer in the Netherlands. I opened the box up, and inside are two rather scruffy-looking Sangean AM/FM shortwave portable radios. Both of them DOA at first. I cleaned took out the leaking batteries, used a nail file on the battery terminals, got both radios working. However, both of them, one in particular, required a lot of doing with getting it set up for the 10 kilohertz offsets for AM broadcast in the US. But I was wondering if anybody else has encountered this bait and switch type deal, because I've heard of it happening before with model trains, and I was wondering if it's cropped up with televisions. And that's my 47.5 cents worth, Steve. 2 cents corrected for inflation. We don't have any audio from you, Steve.
John, you hear me now?
Yes.
Haven't run into that. We have a page in our classified section on scams. And very frequently we got somebody reports to us that someone has a pre-war set for sale. The person, the buyer, potential buyer, becomes suspicious, and sure enough, it's a picture of a set that the guy doesn't own. So that's a fairly common scam. And of course, the other one you're aware of is the well, when you're selling something, I'll buy it from you, but I'll send you a check for $500, and the item is $200, and you have to send $200 to my friend who is going to pick it up, or something like that. And of course, the check he sends is bad.
Yeah, the thing that got me was that both of these radios, after I cleaned them up, work fine. And I had told the guy to refund through the eBay system, and he did that. Now, morally, should I leave any kind of feedback? If so, what would you leave? Be it positive, negative, neutral, and really confused about what I should say in the way of a comment. I'd like to ward off other people from this guy, but not be as confrontational as I could be if I wanted to, given how Papa Oscared. Hey, I've never heard an obscene or profane word here in this forum, and I'm not going to start. Let's just say I was Papa Oscared when I saw that the guy failed to heed my request not to send any substitutes.
Well, my opinion is you ought to tell it how it is.
Okay, appreciate that.
Yeah, that's fair. So I was. Oh, go ahead.
Somebody else have a comment?
Yeah, I wanted to raise an interesting question for this group. Maybe this can be a topic for a future meeting. So thanks so much to the tvboxes.com website and related. I've gotten actually very interested in the history of the UHF converter era, the early UHF years. So This, my most recent vintage TV acquisition, it's an almost mint condition RCA U70 UHF converter from San Francisco. And was a forum discussion on antiqueradios.com about this. And apparently there were 3 versions of this released in 1952. This is the U70, which had all the channels, and there was apparently a U1, which was tuned by your TV technician to 1 channel, and a U2 that had 2 channels. So that's one question. It says, anyone seen the other 2 versions of this? Because I couldn't find pictures. And second, of course, prior to the All Channel Receivers Act of 1962, most sets did not have UHF, and so you had to have the converter. And apparently the first UHF channel went on the air in 1952, Springfield, Massachusetts. And I've seen reference to this, the RCA U70 and related, being the first UHF converters on the market for the 1952 launch of UHF. But I've not been able to confirm this. So basically the questions are, has anyone seen 1 and 2 channel RCA UHF converters? And 2, does anyone know what the exact history was? Which was the very first one from 52? So I thought it'd be an interesting bit of historical research if anyone knew. Thank you.
Hey, Matt?
Yeah.
The first licensed UHF TV broadcaster was KPTV in Portland, so not far away from where you acquired that converter. KPTV did eventually be able to go down to channel 12 on VHF. What you might be thinking of up in Massachusetts was actually, I believe it was the Bridgeport experiment, where RCA had an experimental, shall we say, non-standard offsets, non-standard channel, very early UHF operation, relayed WNBT.
It's interesting. Thank you for that. That's I'm a bit surprised. I found multiple references which gave the let me see here where I written this down. Was WWLP in Springfield, Massachusetts, as being the first one. So WWLP history.
Yeah, KPTV was the first to hit air, though.
Did you ask what the first converters were or the first station?
Well, the Springfield station was the first on the air, but it was experimental.
On
our website, if you go to, I can't send a link easily, but if you go to post-war TV, other equipment, accessories, and then UHF converters, you'll find a picture of the converter. We have one at the museum. Of the converter that was used for reception of the station in Springfield, Bridgeport. Actually, it was Bridgeport.
Little more detail on that, Steve. The Bridgeport transmitter RCA put on the air was licensed experimentally as KC2XAK, and it was basically an RCA stock VHF high band transmitter with a tripler stage added onto it. Once they had done their field testing in Bridgeport, the transmitter was then sold to the station, the startup in Portland, Oregon, and became KPTV. It did rather well till they started mixing the market and other VUs went on the air. And then, of course, like a lot of early U's, it was doomed to failure. So it was a one-of-a-kind transmitter.
Thanks, James. Yeah, that story is on our website too. If you look at the Bridgeport link, I just can't figure out how to do it right now. Anyway, so does anybody else have questions, comments?
Hey,
Well,
everybody, real quickly, I wanted to take the time, with whoever's left on here. I am currently looking for a CTC 7 Worthington, and I will pay absolute top dollar for it. So if anyone has any leads, let me know. I'm willing to even pay like $150 for an actionable lead. So just to throw that out there, I'm looking really hard.
Okay, why don't we call it a wrap? We'll be announcing our next meeting soon, and we will have Chuck Conrad's presentation then, assuming weather improves in Texas. So, good night, everybody. Thanks for attending.
Good night.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it as usual.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for a great meeting, everyone.
Okay, thanks.
Nice job.
Nice job as always, Dave. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.
All right.
Good night.
Along.
Good night. Thank you. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.